Hello, so I'm an artist and I work in animation, and on the side I sell my work at art markets and online. And for the past few months I've had so many boxes of stock piled up against the wall in my office that it's been ruining my entire life. It's only slightly exaggerating, but just out of interest I piled them up to see if they'd be taller than I am, and they are. I am kind of short, but it's still a lot of boxes. So in an effort to reduce some of that pile, I'm going to turn the dead space under these two cabinets into some really useful drawers. Currently all I store there is dust, and I'm going to be able to get some more storage without using up any more of the footprint of the room, so I think it's a great idea. This was originally just going to be one video, and as I was making it I realized just how much work it was, so I've decided to split it into two. First we're going to tackle this yellow cabinet behind me, and then the orange in the next one. So let's go. So once again I'm using red oak to match the cabinet top and my shelving, and I want to try and grain match all the pieces, which means I'll cut them all in order from this larger board, and the grain will flow continuously along the side of the cabinet and across the front. I don't like ripping anything this long on my table saw, and so I got down on the ground and did it with a circular saw. My track isn't long enough to do this in one go though, so I had to do half the cut and then reposition it to finish it. I chose to rip it first so that I'm left with one long offcut rather than a few small pieces. And at the time I was just thinking it would give me more possibilities to use it in the future. Little did I know that I would need it for this same project, so I was really glad I did that. I made this piece from MDF off camera because there was like a little bit of back and forth to get it to fit nicely into the opening and around some screws that are holding the feet on. I actually ended up using this MDF for the opposite side because it's sat up against the wall, so it won't be visible. And if that becomes a problem later on, I will deal with it then. The legs have this taper to them, and so I'm going to have to make what I'm calling a spacer block for each end, so the drawers will be able to sit clear of the legs. I didn't have a measuring tape with me, so I'm just marking that onto a scrap piece here. Back in my little workshop here, I cut the oak side down to length on the miter saw, and then I ripped it down to its final width on the table saw. I decided to use half lap joints for the two oak pieces in the spacer blocks. It'll be covered by the leg anyway, but I thought since the taper goes down to about just an inch, like I didn't want there to be a chance that any screws might be visible. And so it was over to the router table, which I made myself a couple of years ago, and I'm honestly still really impressed that I was actually able to successfully make a new router base out of Perspex. I did a test cut on some MDF and it was looking pretty good, so I did it to the oak side too. The next day I ripped down some slightly oversized half-inch ply strips for the drawer boxes, which I will cut to their exact width later on the table saw. I actually miscalculated and cut 4 here when I needed 6, so I did 2 more later on. And then cannibalizing this old planer sled, I cut 2 strips of 3/4 inch ply, which will be used for the 2 side spacers. And so now that I know how wide those spacers are going to be on each end, I could mark out all the pieces I'd need for the front side. Since I'm attempting grain matching, it was really important to get these measurements right. And it was also really important to label each part clearly and mark the direction that it's supposed to face, because I really don't want anything flipping around by accident, you know? So since the front piece of oak on the spacer is only about 2 inches wide, I left it attached to one of the drawer fronts so that I could run it through the router safely and cut the rest of the half lap. When I had it, not quite perfect, but good enough for my needs since it'll be hidden anyway, I cut it away from the drawer front. I do think that maybe just as best practice, I should have kept working on that joint until it was like 100%, because there is a slight gap, but once it lined up correctly on the front side, I was happy enough. Here I'm marking how long the 3/4 inch ply needed to be, and then I cut them down on the miter saw, and I also cut 4 little blocks, which will make sense in just a sec. So they'll sit between the sides and the longer ply pieces to fill out the spacer blocks to the width that they'll need to be to clear the tapered legs. There'll be one of those at each end, and then 2 drawer boxes will sit in between them. So you can see here I've got 2 of those little half-lapped 2-inch wide blocks. I just repeated the process for the other side. When I first started making stuff, it didn't occur to me to care about the placement of screws, which you'll see during a close-up of my workbench later. But like even here, they're not going to be visible, but I still took the time to eyeball them so they'd look fairly neat. And if I know that screws are going to be visible, then I'll get my ruler and make absolutely sure that they're symmetrical. I think it just makes it look a little more considered and like some more care and attention has gone into what you're doing, and it really doesn't take that much extra effort to do it, That just occurred to me. I felt like sharing it. When those were assembled, I took them home again to put them in place and measure the distance between them to be absolutely sure of how big the boxes would need to be. I'm such a clever boy, double and triple checking. I mean, really, there's no way I could make a mistake after being so careful,
Back in the workshop, these are the back and sides for the drawer boxes, which I had rough cut with a circular saw earlier on, and I trimmed them to their final width off camera. Here I'm just taking my time to carefully go through them to figure out how I wanted to orient them, and I labeled and marked them accordingly. I'm so sure I got mixed up in the end and put a few of them together upside down anyway, which is fine because the boxes themselves are also not going to be visible. But I'm just trying to get into the habit of being a little more mindful about the orientation of the material and trying to hide knots or highlight the nicest grain pattern, that kind of thing. I used double-sided tape to stick both of the back pieces together to make sure that when I cut them, they'd be the exact same length. Because as you saw me double and triple check, and that measurement's very important, gotta get it right. Foreshadowing. And then I figured out how deep the boxes needed to be, which was the same depth as the side spacers, and so I just took a measurement directly from those. I cut those 4 sides down, and then it was time to cut the tops and bottoms. I used 1/4" ply, and rather than using solid pieces, I decided to use a narrow strip at the front and back of the box just to save material. And I had originally measured those strips to be 4.5 inches wide, and then I realized if I did 4-inch strips instead, that the leftover piece would be wide enough to use as the base for one of the drawers, so I'm really happy I caught that. The next day it was time to get these boxes put together. I forgot to record putting this bit on, but it was like boom, 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 attached. I kind of didn't know how I was going to get them square because there were only 3 sides, so I went with clamping down one side so it would stay put, and then I could make adjustments to the other side if I needed to. Once I got that first piece stuck down, the whole thing was totally rigid, and then I was able to fly through the rest. And then I repeat that process for the second box, and in no time at all I had them both done. Back home I tested the fit, and pay attention here now because this is where all that measuring and double checking and careful planning really pays off.
I brought these home last night, all expectant, ready to fit them, and they don't fit. And the kind of details of what happened aren't that important, other than to say, I can't read a tape measure, so we have to go fix them. And I have to say, like, I'm smiling about this now, but didn't exactly see the funny side last night.
So it was back to the workshop to fix them, and it really wasn't a pretty fix, but you know, I got the job done. I had to chop them down shorter and then reattach the sides, and so I used a jigsaw to do that. Oh, okay, thank Christ, that is a perfect fit. Now that I know that they actually go in, I can put on the drawer slides, and then I'll probably measure for the drawers one more time just to be safe, and then go make them. I don't know why, but the instructions on these slides say you need to set them back 2mm from the opening, so that's what I did. My desk isn't quite level, so I shimmed up the back of the box with some paper until the level gave me a level reading, and then I could balance it in place on the slide and mark where I needed to drill. These slides don't sit flat. The back needs to be raised up a little, which seems weird to me. I feel like they would be easier to install if that back piece was just a little bit longer so that it raised them to the height that they needed to be, but I don't know. I presume there's a reason for that. They've been making them for a while, you know? Back in the workshop, it was time to start working on the drawers, so I roughly ripped down 8 strips of 1/2-inch ply. The track that I have is handy for breaking down sheets, but it doesn't really allow for repeatability, so running them through the table saw makes sure that they're all uniform. This was my first time using this micro jig ripper, which I bought to be safer on the table saw, and in a way, it felt scarier than the push sticks that I normally use just because I'm not used to it, which is why the way I'm doing it looks so weird. Anyway, when those are done, I gave them a little hand sanding just to clean up the edges. Sometimes I feel like I might over describe what I'm doing. There's like a part of me that just hates vagueness, like you need to know what I'm doing with absolute clarity. It's pretty obvious here that I'm measuring for the depth of the drawers, so I don't need to say that, even though I just did. Anyway, the sides are short enough that I was able to set up a stop for repeated cuts, which was cool, but the back and fronts were too long for that, and so I attached them together with double-sided tape so that I could cut them at the same time. But the footage for those cuts is terrible. Like, what's going on here? Probably pretty safe to assume that I was making a cut, but we can't really know. So when I got those to what I thought was the correct length, spoilers, I gave them all a quick sanding. So I was just cutting down some pieces for the drawer bases there. And then I spent a little bit of time just figuring out which side that I would like to see when I looked down into the drawer. When I had that figured out, I gave them a sanding and then labeled them so I'd remember later on. That's that little bit of extra awareness that I was talking about. I think I'm getting better at doing that. I put the drawers together in quite a similar way to how I assembled the drawer boxes. I found it pretty effective to clamp one piece to the edge of the bench like this, and then I could just flush it up to the other piece and then glue them together and pop in some brad nails to hold them. So I made two L shapes and then attached them together, and I used these really handy corner clamps to hold them. It can take a little bit of time to set them up, but you know that once you have it right, they're not going to go anywhere when you nail them. I came up with this method to attach the bases, and I don't know if it's smart or like really not. I was wondering how you make absolutely sure that the drawer is square, and so it just made sense to me to get the base pinned in place with one nail, and then I flipped the whole thing over, and I could check for square by measuring the diagonals and make whatever adjustments were needed until it was correct. And then carefully, without moving anything, I nailed the opposite corner from below, so then it was locked in place and I could fire in the rest. I got good results, but I think realistically it probably does leave a lot of room for error, and so next time I make drawers, I'll figure out how you're supposed to do it. I attached both bases this way, and I purposely left them a little oversized so it gave me room for adjustments. I used a jigsaw to remove the bulk of it, and then flush trimmed it with a router, and you're not going to believe this, a flush trim bit. So I've run into a bit of a problem in a long series of problems. These drawers are too tall and too long, which is about as bad as it can get. The height happened because I forgot that basically when you load them onto these drawer sides, you need to tilt them first so that the wheels can overlap, and then you slide it down and in. The width is a bigger issue. It's just too tight. I haven't done this before. I really didn't realize that you need to give it more of a tolerance. So the slide that's connected to the drawer box and the slide that's connected to the drawer are just jammed up against each other. And not exactly the sliding action you would want. Yeah, not great. I'm just gonna try and shave like a millimeter off. Well, that's more promising than before. So let's go back to these spacers and get them finished. I had to notch out little sections on these smaller parts to fit around the screws that hold on the cabinet feet. And so I used a jigsaw to do that. And looking back, I probably should have removed the bulk of it with the jigsaw and then used the chisel to sneak up to the line and get it really clean. And so going forward, that is the method I think that I will use, but I didn't do it here. When both of those were done, I could attach them to the spacers permanently, and pocket holes felt like the perfect application for that, and so that's what I did. There's a little gap here, but it doesn't matter because the leg is going to sit over it. So really, these edges are the thing that mattered, and they came out pretty perfect. And then it was back home to attach the drawer fronts. There's a lot of back and forth on this one. I used the classic little trick of stacking up playing cards to make sure that the reveal was equal all the way around the fronts. And when I was happy with how they looked, I started with the first drawer and used some double-sided tape to temporarily fix the front in place, and then attached it from the inside. Oh man, that looks so good. I'm so happy with that.
So I got these metal handles for the drawer fronts. I never really loved them. They're kind of too chunky, but they were only a $5 for a pack of 2. They were the closest that I could get to match the handles that are already on the cabinet. I was going to spray paint them blue. I thought they'd be kind of a cool contrast. But anyway, they're not going to work. I didn't take into account just how short these drawers are. if I mount this in the middle, it's so huge that the handle part just rubs on the floor, and if I move it up to avoid that, it just looks kind of weird, so I'm going to do something else.
I'm going to make some drawer pulls using this polyester strap, which I bought 1 meter of for 99 cents from a shop down in Cork, and received no less than 4 emails updating me on the shipping status. And it's just like, listen, bang it in an envelope, don't worry about it, it'll get to me when it gets to me. Do you know what I mean? I think this particular strap is a little bit too dark. I wanted a light blue, but I couldn't find it. Maybe if I looked locally, I might be able to, but I went with this anyway. It looks pretty good when light hits it, but for the most part, it's quite dark and looks almost black. So I think if I can find something better, I will eventually replace it. This kind of pull, by the way, is something that I'm totally copying from Laura Kampf, who is my favorite maker, hands down. I got this patch because I support Laura on Patreon, and if I owned an iron, this would have been stuck down onto my jacket immediately. Oh, maybe you just sew it on. Anyway, drawers. So there's quite a bit of sanding to do to get these ready for finishing. Obviously, some of these pieces are for the second cabinet, which you'll see in the next video, so you can just kind of ignore those for now. People say that sanding is boring, and they're absolutely right, but where I used to just skip past it as quick as I could, I do now understand how important it is, and so I do take the time to get it right. So I finished sanding everything and then gave them a good clean to remove any dust, and then it was time to finish them. I'm using Danish oil, which I've worked with before, but this time I'm mixing the first coat with 20% white spirits, because I've heard it penetrates into the wood a little bit deeper. I did read that on the can the last time I used them, but I just thought like, how important can it be? Let's just go for it. So I am kind of getting a little bit better and learning more each time I do things. I'm like trying to learn patience, I think. For example, this first coat, I didn't have any gloves, and it's so sticky and horrible that I made sure to get some for the next couple of coats. And I will use gloves every time that I apply finish in future. Also, like health-wise, it's probably better to wear them too. So I got a nice first coat on, and I left them for about 15 minutes for the oil to really soak in, and then I wiped away the excess. And over the next few days, I did another couple of coats and then left them to cure completely. All of the drawers that I built have some scorch marks in various places, and I don't really know why that happened. I was about to try and offer an explanation. I don't really know. My original plan was like, okay, I'll just paint all the drawers black. It'll be a cool contrast against the oak. It'll be fine. And then my girlfriend said, sorry, there's a bird going absolutely ham outside. Cool. Yeah, my girlfriend was like, you don't really want to paint them black, do you? Like, it'll be very dark. And she's right, of course, as she is about most things. And so what I'm going to do instead is just paint the top rim a different primary color. And I think that could look kind of fun. I was kind of hoping I could get away with not mixing too much, but neither of these really look like the kind of blue I was hoping for. While I'm sort of taking a moment to paint these, I just want to say something more on improving at this craft since I touched on it a minute ago. I really do want to improve at this, and I'm so eager to do things right and to continue trying to develop the patience to do things properly. I've said a few things to that effect so far in this video. I really do think that I put that into practice more than ever before while building the drawers for these two cabinets. And you'll even see that there are a couple of things I did in this video that I kind of improve on in the next one. And I just love how there's always an opportunity to try something new or to do something just a little bit better than you did it last time. Anyway, sorry, I'm feeling a little bit sentimental. I love making stuff, it's so fun. Anyway, I finished painting the drawer tops and then I got them reinstalled into the drawer boxes, which at this point I had fixed together, so it was just one big piece. And then it was time to finally get everything installed together for the last time. So as I said in the intro, this is just an attempt to reduce that pile of stock somewhat. I'm under no illusion that I'm going to fit it all into these drawers. And so until such a time in the future that I have built enough storage solutions to encompass everything, this is a cool first step, and I'm really looking forward to figuring it all out completely, hopefully sooner rather than later. I have a lot more of these than I remembered, so drawboyshawnee.etsy.com, I think. One of the biggest problems with the massive pile of boxes is that at some point everything kind of got jumbled together. So there were just bits and pieces in every box and it took forever to find anything. Like I knew I had more zines somewhere and sure enough, I found a bunch more at the bottom of the pile. At the time of recording this, my Etsy's been closed for about 6 weeks. It kind of just got overwhelming and I needed to shut it until I got more organized. But I think by the time the next video comes out, it'll be back up because I should have a better system for running it, you know? Anyway, this is it for part 1. I think it was a super successful endeavor. With just these 2 drawers, I was able to get rid of 3 boxes, and I'm very excited to reduce it even further in the next one. And it looks really good. Super pleased with how it turned out. This episode was brought to you by the support of my patrons. Editorial support from Ozzy the Cat, fact-checking by Henry the Dog, Moose is our executive producer, and as soon as I'm finished recording here, I'm going to get started on the next part, so there really won't be too long at all to wait for that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.